just to sort of lay the foundation for what we'll talk about, which is why this should matter in the legal industry, there is some early emerging research around gender disparities. And two studies that you and I have been looking at over the last week or so come from a July study from the Department of the Bank for International Settlements. And then a more recent study that came out in October from the Brookings Institution report about the future of AI and the American worker. And the first paper, the BIS paper, really highlights gender disparities in AI adoption. So the paper finds that there's a Gen AI gender gap. And based on the studies that they've done, they find that about 50% of men reported using generative AI in the past year, as compared with only 37% of women. And, the upshot of the paper is that they recommend more research around why this is the case. And we can sort of hypothesize why we think it might be the case, but there needs to be more research into causality. But what they have identified early on is about three-quarters of that disparity can be attributed to a lack of awareness among women as compared to men about generative AI and access to the technology, or engagement with the technology. And the other quarter they attribute to women having a heightened concern about trusting artificial intelligence with their data. So a fear or hesitancy around engaging with frontier models and giving it information. And that study really complements, in a negative way, I think, a second study from the Brookings Institution about how generative AI might actually impact the work that we do and the labor force. And the report makes the point that traditionally, when we think about disruption because of technology, we think about blue collar work, physical labor, and the image that we might have in our mind is of male dominated professions. But in fact, based on some data that the Brookings Institution studied from OpenAI about exposure rates, first, the data generally finds that more than 30% of all workers could see at least 50% of their occupation's tasks disrupted by generative AI. But there are segments of the workforce whose work will be disrupted more. And they highlight the potential elevated disruption among office and administrative support occupations as having a high automation potential. And women really comprise the overwhelming majority of the nearly 19 million Americans that are employed in that sector. And they note that this is racially and ethnically a diverse population. There doesn't seem to be a disparate impact across race and ethnicity. But there really does seem to be a potential disproportionate impact among female workers who are in jobs that traditionally have required a college education and are focused on administrative and clerical work in offices. And the last thing I'll say, Bridget, before I hear all the things that you think about this, is just they drill down in the different occupational sectors and industries around discrepancies in gender in roles. And one that they focus on is the legal industry. And they note that in the legal industry, among legal secretaries and administrative assistants, 88% of the tasks that they do are more likely to be automated in a world of generative AI. And that 96%, that was a number that even surprised me at how high it is. 96% of the people that hold those jobs are women. And then paralegals and legal assistants have about 58% of their tasks that are susceptible to automation, and 83% of the people that hold those roles are women. By comparison, lawyers' tasks are susceptible in about 32% of the categories of tasks that lawyers perform. But women comprise about 40% of that part of the legal industry. So, some really interesting findings here and suspicions about what the future holds. But you also found some different research in another sector.
Yeah, I mean, I'm eager to jump into like what all this means or what it might mean for the legal profession. Obviously, I don't know, but I've thoughts. But there's a BCG study also from 2024. I can't now remember. I don't now remember the month, but it found that women in tech are using generative AI tools at work even more. I mean, it's very, very close, but more than their male counterparts. And senior women are ahead of their male counterparts in Gen AI adoption. Of course, that's within the tech industry. And I think that it's still the case that overall in tech there are more men than women. So I'm not sure we're gonna make up the delta in technology that we're losing in legal and other industries. But there's some findings from that study that I think are consistent with what we see from the other two, which is that women have a lower risk tolerance in adopting new technologies without clear policies and clear understanding of risks, which can hinder early adoption. That makes a lot of sense given the other findings. I feel like this. I worry about these findings for legal in particular, because I think that each makes the other each makes me more concerned about the other. Because as you know, I'm optimistic about the possibility that the legal profession might be able to um, all of a sudden be able to solve a lot more problems that right now it can't as a result of this technology. I'm basically an optimist, not a tech accelerationist necessarily, but an optimist about what it could mean for the legal profession and what that might mean for our communities. Um, but I but I think unless we're thoughtful about what it looks like, we could really lose out on a lot of the smartest pathways to that better future. So if we have a gender disparity right now at the time when probably we all need to be rolling up our sleeves and figuring out what this might look like and how do we get to that positive set of outcomes that I think we can get to. We need everybody in that conversation, and we definitely need women in that conversation. And I do think, without women in that conversation, we won't have the best answers for the Brookings study findings. And I think there are good answers there, but they require us to have a fully inclusive conversation about what it all means. So I feel like they underscore each of those studies, like, underscores what worries me most about the other, and so they're kind of, I'm concerned about them more in tandem than each individually. I you know, do you have, other thoughts about why you think, um, it's turning out this way in so many industries apart from tech maybe? Why is it that I think the risk tolerance thing makes a lot of sense and resonates with me, but you do so much presenting to lawyers and law firms. I wonder if you have any other thoughts about why the disparity in the take up, which, I think will matter for the roadmap, that we need to find.
Yeah, I don't actually know why women are less likely to be aware of AI, and I'm always hesitant to sort of sweep with a really broad brush around, women have these personality traits and men have these personality traits. But like you said, I mean, to the extent that some of the early thought is that women approach things more cautiously and are thoughtful about it, does make sense to me. Um, Also this idea that, and this is not an all women thing. I'll just speak for myself. If I'm a rules follower, right? I love innovation. I love coming up with new ideas, but I'm not a Mark Zuckerberg move fast and break things type, right? So if my organization has not communicated a policy to me that allows me to play around with technology, I'm probably unlikely to do it on my own because I don't wanna do anything to jeopardize the organization's security. I think for that reason, it's so much more important, A, that organizations do what you do at the AAA, which is really encourage people, give people the guidelines for experimentation, but then encourage everybody to be taking part in it. And relatedly, communication is so important. Almost every law firm that I visit has an AI policy in place. But when you ask people or you quiz about what the policy allows or what it prohibits, most people don't know because people are busy and they're not paying attention to something that sits on an intranet or, has gone out in an email. So that for me on a personal level resonates. And, the other point that you had about optimism, I was also very optimistic when we started talking about generative AI and particularly its impact on the billable hour, that this could be the dawn of a different type of practice in the private sector where you're not tethered to the number of hours in your day and your values not driven by how many of those hours you dedicate to practice, but is really more closely aligned with the quality of the legal work that you deliver, and I don't think that there's, any data in the world that could suggest that women lawyers are not as strong as male lawyers are when it comes to the quality of their legal work, but we know that when women, choose to leave the workplace to start families, that there's a disproportionate burden on their ability to bill hours, and so I was hopeful that this tech could actually help tackle that a little bit. And so that's what struck me as, to your point, I am still optimistic for that to be the outcome, but I don't think it will be the natural outcome if these are some of the early indicators that we're seeing.
It won't be the outcome if we're not intentional, right? But it does feel like, I've said a lot of times in the context of legal education, I think there's some open lanes for law schools that are really intentional and thoughtful about how they use the technology in education to train their students to be competitive in the marketplace. There's all kinds of, I think, opportunities for an innovator at a law school. Law school administrators who are innovators to really, jump the line in terms of how people think about their law school. Might that be true about law firms as well? I mean, could you imagine a law firm saying, we are all in on using generative AI tools to support our associates who want to, figure out a different path in how they, navigate their relationship with the firm. And we don't think that if you're going to be, working at home for some period of your employment, that should impact you. And we now think it doesn't have to. I mean, do you see an opportunity for law firms to use an intentional strategy around generative AI to be a place that attracts women? Is that possible?
I do, and it feels like a really good transition into the next era of inclusion in law firms because it feels like it aligns with what we should be doing anyway, which is leveraging technology to provide better service to clients that is more efficient and actually allows them to solve the problems that they came to the firm for. So it doesn't feel like it's a forced effort to make something happen that, maybe not be popular across the board or maybe not be embraced by everybody. But really, I mean, firms don't want to lose their great talent, no matter who that talent is. But the current model just creates results where they hemorrhage female talent. Really, at a time when women are developing clients, becoming really expert in their practice area, if you're talking about the practice side of the firm, or getting to understand the business and moving into senior roles on the business side of the firm. So to me, it's a win-win, right? You want to attract the best talent, regardless of who that talent is, and then you want to keep them there. So it's also, talking about law schools, having been in a law school for a long time and having started in career strategy, I know how much law firms compete for top talent, and it's very hard for them to differentiate themselves from one another. And this to me seems like a really creative and innovative way to say we take diversity and inclusion seriously and we go beyond, what's been done before to think about emerging technologies and how women can really build and sustain a career here while, becoming experts and serving our clients well. So yes, I see big opportunities. Um, but again, it won't happen by accident. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.